This program is brought to you by the Merdeka Award, an initiative to promote excellence by ExxonMobil, Petronas, and Shell.
Hello, I'm Cynthia Ng, and you are tuning in to the Merdeka Award Roundtable. Now, for the next 1 hour, we will be discussing the role of non-profits in Malaysia. Now, the principal goal of non-profits, generally, they are there to serve a public mission, to be the agents of service, as well as support to the needs and interests of the community. But times are changing, the needs of society have increased, and so the expectations and role of a non-profit has increased and become more demanding as well. So what are some of those challenges, and what is the best way forward for NPOs to best serve their mission? That is our topic for today, and joining me, I have a panel of wonderful experts and people on the ground doing great things, and please, I'd like to welcome them to the show right now. I'd like to start with, on my right, I have with me Tuan Haji Hakim bin Hamzah. He is the National Honorary Treasurer of the Malaysian Red Crescent Society. Thanks so much for joining us. And next to me, I have Dr. Saunthari Somasundaram. Now, she is the President as well as Medical Doctor for the National Cancer Society Malaysia. And I'd also like to welcome Raj Ridwan Singh, or better known as Teacher Raj. He is the founder and CEO of Souls 24/7. And of course, this is a familiar face joining us today, Ms. Deborah Henry. She's the co-founder of the Fugee School, World Vision's child's rights advocate, a former beauty queen as well as a TV host. Thank you so much for joining us. And last but not least, we have Professor Dato Dr. Syed Mohamed Aljunid, Professor of Health Economics and Public Health Medicine from UKM University Kebangsaan Malaysia. Thank you so much for coming here on the show. Now let's all start with some of the roles that NPOs have been taking on, not only to serve the community, but also to complement the role of the government, the work of the government. And given how times are changing, I believe the expectations have become more demanding as well.
Yes.
Yeah, let's start with that and understanding the realities that NPOs are facing in Malaysia. Can I start with you, Doctor?
Okay. Generally, I think NGOs start off from organic growth, meaning that people who are passionate about something, they have a cause that they want to serve. However, as the NGO goes a long time and matures, there needs to be a structure in place for the NGO to run. So there needs to be some transparency, accountability within the NGO. And getting that within an NGO, I think, can be difficult when you don't have the expertise, because a lot of people who have the passion might not have the expertise which is required in that cause.
Okay. Well, is that something that your organization is facing too, Raj? Because I understand you serve underserved communities, I would say, children, and would that be a problem in terms of finding skills and resources to carry out the work that you're doing?
Sure, most definitely. I mean, with professionals, right, traditionally they go into corporate companies, and to sort of get the expertise to come and work in organizations and NGOs. So there are a lot of people who are willing to volunteer, and they'll do it 3 months, 6 months, but then when it actually gets to, every process takes a couple of years, if not longer, and with the lower pays, they are not able to sustain their lifestyle. And that's why then you have a challenge to be able to recruit good professionals into the nonprofit sector. But that is actually drastically changing now in Malaysia with the emergence of CSR. A lot of big companies, and thanks to the Security Commission and their encouragement to all these big companies to sort of come forward and contribute directly towards NGOs, NPOs, and social enterprises throughout Malaysia.
When you talk about contributing directly, are we talking more on the funding side or capacity building? What is it that?
So primarily it's still the funding side. So most large corporations have foundations or CSR departments. And step by step, we have seen this change of employee volunteerism, as what they call it. And but again, it's very short term. It's always a weekend one-off thing, or they go by an orphanage and paint and stuff like that. So it's very one-off, non-sustainable efforts. And I think that's where big change should happen, when professionals can get involved directly with organizations and participate actively, consistently.
Okay, now let's talk about some of the your experience, Deborah. I understand that you serve your organization provide education to refugees, and given how the world is moving, wars around the world, and there is increasing need for that service, are you feeling the pressure? I mean, when it comes to running an organization like that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, as we speak today, there are over 60 million refugees and internally displaced people globally, and that's the largest number since World War II. So it is an absolute crisis, and there just aren't enough funds going around to support refugees everywhere in the world. And bringing it back closer to home in Malaysia, you know, we have over 150,000 refugees registered with UNHCR, and I've been doing this for 8 years now, and the needs are growing. And so the two main areas that we face in Malaysia is adults cannot work formally, and children can't go to formal schools. So for refugees living here, I mean, we were just talking earlier, and we were saying that it's a natural instinct for any human being to want to survive. And so you're going to find a way to work, to get a job, to pay for your things, to live, basically. And so I think this is the biggest handicap for refugees here. And so in Malaysia, you have many, many schools like Fugee School that's set up, and our goals are education for all children.
Right.
It's a very
no child
simplistic,
gets left behind. That's
yes,
your
and it's a very simplistic goal, and I think that's the easiest way to keep us on that path, to keep us so we know what our priority is and we don't get sidetracked in what we're doing. And of course, we've achieved what we have because of the private sector, because of Malaysians. And so there's so much reliance on individual citizens, society coming together, seeing a cause and really wanting to play a role and to make that change. And it's very possible when every person does something, the impact will be great.
Now you pointed out that people do want to help, but sometimes they may not have the time to do it, or maybe the commitment. And of course, we talked about funding, resources. I'd like to get your thoughts, Dato, given that you have worked across the world, you've been in mostly developing countries, and looking how non-profits work. What are some of the challenges that you are noticing for Malaysian NPOs?
Thank you very much for such an important question that you posed to me. I come in from the perspective of health economics and also from the health system perspective. NGOs, whether it is profit or not profit, is an entity which is recognized as a main sort of important partner in providing good healthcare services to the community, especially when the country doesn't have enough resources. We are talking about developing countries where the resources that comes in or prepared or available less than maybe 3 to 4% of GDP. And when these countries face issues like certain calamities, earthquakes, or some other issues, they cannot sort of react to that because they don't have enough resources, financial resources as well as human resource capacity to do that. This is where NGOs come in. But the more important aspect that we need to look at is that when we say non-governmental organization or NPOs, it is actually not well sort of spelled out in terms of their functions and all that. From the research perspective, we can divide them into 3 groups. One is a not-for-profit organization. The other one is for-profit organization. These are all NGOs. Yeah? And the third one, which is quite difficult because sometimes what they tell us is not what they actually are. These are the controversial ones. They might tell you that they are non-for-profit, but at the end, when they operate worse than the for-profit organization. Imagine this kind of organization come into a less developed country which have very little capacity to actually respond to them. Sometimes it creates more mess than problems, than the issues that they are facing. So on one hand, the countries need support from the non-government organization, but at the same time, we have to be very careful about their contributions. We need them, but it has to be coordinated. It has to be properly sort of vetted through. And there are many other issues that we can discuss later on in terms of this.
So we've touched about coordination. We talk about perhaps sometimes there are overlapping roles as well. Now I'd like to get to Tuan Haji in terms of, we talked about funding, which I want to focus on right now. Yes. I mean, Malaysian Crescent Society has been around for so long, and in terms of funding, are funds harder to come by these days for an organization such as yours?
Yes, funds are getting harder and harder to come by, but when there is a disaster, when there is an appeal to the Malaysian public, the funds would come in. We would get assistance not just in cash, but also in kind. We get organizations like Nestle, for example, contributing food stuff that can be delivered to the victims. Given that, we have also need to think of new avenues to raise our funds. We need to work on the use of social media, for example, how companies, for example, like the NKF, getting Maybank card members to donate their points, and UNHCR getting bonus link members to donate their points. So these are new ways of raising funds, and we have to be innovative. We have to look at new ways, and we have to maximize our resources. We have to work together. We have to be better coordinated in order to maximize what we have.
Okay, now I would like to take this discussion to our first commercial break, but when we come back, let's explore what are some of the alternative avenues, and largely I think the goal here, how do you create a sustainable funding as well in terms of financial resources as well as human resources, and that we will be discussing after the break. This is the Merdeka Award Roundtable. Welcome back, and you're tuning in to the Merdeka Award Roundtable. We are talking about the role of non-profits in Malaysia, and earlier we spoke about sustainability of funding as well as human resources. How can you be more self-sufficient in the sense that there is that reliance towards large corporates to give money, but at the same time you want your independence as well? So how do you go about that for you?
We realized that corporate funding required you to have simple KPIs, simple ROIs or SROIs, SROIs as we call them, social return on investment. And if you could sort of pitch to them and say, okay, this is what we want to do, this is a problem we're solving, this is how we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to measure it, we found that approach to be very, very useful for SOLs. So for us, I mean, depending on the various programs that we run, we make sure that the program is relevant to the community needs. So for example, you don't teach fishing to someone who's in a landlocked area, right? And in the same way, we make sure that the programs that we promote and that we train are relevant. And two, how do you measure it? So we do impact analysis, right? So about 2.5, 3 years ago, we introduced impact analysis within our nonprofit and also in our social enterprise. And that really helped us actually measure, and it's not just measuring to report, but it's more so measuring to self-improve, right? So then we know how do we move forward, how do we improve, what are the areas that we're still lacking, and it's a process. And so that's how we do it. Okay,
and we are also seeing a new wave of smaller NGOs, for example, yes. And sometimes you do see overlapping mission. I'd like to get your views about that, Doctor. Do you see that as a limitation when it comes to getting funding or resources when it comes to so many organizations doing the same thing?
It is. I think corporates, as we mentioned before, there is such a thing as donor fatigue. And it really depends on the type of cause that you're championing as well. Certain causes, I think, are easier to champion than other causes. Causes that you can have an immediate visual impact, get funding much earlier or much easier than others. Corporates, I love CSR, I do admit, in terms of corporate funding, because it does assist NGOs to go into partnerships and collaborations. But the downside with some of the CSR, some corporations, is that they don't actually understand the essence of CSR, and they see it as a branding exercise.
That's true.
And then you get the issues or the challenges of that they want things done specific ways. Which might not be quite aligned with your own goals. So it's very important, I think, for the NGO itself that they are very well rooted. You know, that I always talk about NGOs as, you know, as a tree. You have a good rooting system, so your root doesn't change. So your philosophy, your ethos, your beliefs, that doesn't change. Your mission, your mandate, that doesn't change. What changes is the manner that you do things. But you have to have that that pillar, so that when you are with these corporations, who, yes, have greater expertise in many areas than you do, especially for smaller organizations, you are able to see through the forest, to make sure that what you want to do is aligned with the company, so that you get the best, the most effective program out there.
And Tuan Haji, in terms of maintaining that independence to carry out the work that you want to do and get the message across, at the same time, there is that expectations from donors as well. How do you manage that?
We've got our fundamental principles, and independence is one of the 7. So it's important that we maintain our independence and neutrality, so that and also being impartial to whoever we serve. We serve those who are in need, and regardless of race, religion, color, or gender, we will serve everyone. So we will stick to our fundamental principles regardless of the demands of the donors.
I'll have to get to Deborah first, because your work Monday to Fridays, you're providing education for children, and it must be tiring at the same time, but
Yes.
you want to continue that work, but how do you manage that? Resources, expertise, skills that you need?
I think the refugee issue in Malaysia is quite a grey one, where for us to garner a lot of support through the CSR channel, it's also difficult because I think a lot of society are not sure where they stand on the issue. And so it forces us to be very creative and inventive in how we do things. And so a lot of the NGOs like Fugee School, we're very small. We were born out of a necessity, and so I guess it's an advantage in that we can try to become more of a social enterprise. We can try to really think out of the box, utilize crowdfunding platforms to garner donations, to garner support. As you say, we are running a school, so it's very much service driven. We need volunteer teachers, we need resources, we need space, and so we found that the support